The following is a production of UNO Television for KYNE TV.
Consider This with Carol Schrader is supported in part by Allegiant Health, Bass & Associates, and Nebraskans for Public Television.
Consider This with Carol Schrader, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to UNO. Consider this, the number of AIDS cases in the state of Nebraska is leveling off. Does that mean that we have not so much to fear about as we did when we felt that the AIDS epidemic was rampant, even growing in our community? Let's talk to some people who know. Ron Carlett is a resource center coordinator for the Nebraska AIDS Project, and if you hear him say NAP or anything like that, you'll know it's Nebraska AIDS Project. Paulette Bailey is the NAP outreach educator, and also with us today is Larry Bierce. He is the education coordinator for the Nebraska AIDS Project. And I was sort of startled when I heard that, and then the AIDS cases, Nebraska leveling off, nationally, even internationally somewhat. There is some, not good news, but at least a feeling that it's not going rampant. Now I want to hear from you, but.
However, the number of AIDS cases is leveling off because people are not progressing from being HIV positive to having AIDS as quickly. We've learned a lot more about treating HIV, preventing the opportunistic infections that come along with the infection.
All those great medicinal cocktails
Right,
I hear
right.
about, they keep adding to and subtracting from.
The medications and prevention.
But that doesn't mean the HIV virus is not around
That's true.
and capable of being very friendly and going from person to person, which is our main concern. Now, you folks are in the education business with Nebraska AIDS Project, and you certainly are. I mean, everywhere you go, you're educating people about the AIDS virus, HIV virus. What are the biggest fears you have of someone who works, people who work with adults, teenagers, whatever organization you're dealing with, in terms of misconceptions? You go, wow, these people are really off the mark. I've really got to drive what home?
I would say making people believe that it does exist.
Oh, but it doesn't exist in my neighborhood.
Right.
And it doesn't exist in my socioeconomic group.
Very hard to convince people that yes, this does happen to people just like you. Yes, this can happen to your sister, your brother, your mother, father. It's making people believe that it does happen.
But it only happens, it happens to homosexual males, and it happens to, it happened to Magic Johnson, but that was just an aberration. And then, you know, you've got your IV drug users, and of course, not related to any of those. So, Larry, you know, what do you want to wave in front of someone's face? And I know people don't come right out and say that, but can you feel that sometimes there's that undercurrent?
Well, I think there are just a lot of potential issues going on. Part of what I hear a lot of is, you know, now that AIDS isn't just a gay disease, we can talk about it and we can bring it into our schools and we can deal with it a little bit more openly. And that's true, and that's a good thing that that is happening, but I guess the other side of that is, what would it mean if it were primarily only gay men who were getting HIV disease? Does that mean that we would have to go back to 1981 and not talk about it or discuss it? So that's a little bit discouraging and a little bit encouraging. Yes, people are getting better at discussing it and bringing it into daily life, but there are still people who get forgotten in part of that dialogue. And we were talking earlier about the drop or leveling off of AIDS deaths and AIDS diagnoses, and that's true in the developed, industrialized, economically stable world. That is not at all true in most of the developing world, where people are rampantly dying and rampantly becoming infected, all the way from older men and women to babies whose mothers cannot get AZT for perinatal transmission prevention.
In fact, I've heard some statistics that in some parts of Africa, 2 in 5, 1 in 5, 3 in 5, depending on where you are, children that are born have the HIV virus. Sub-Saharan Africa, some of the countries there. I mean, that is staggering to me.
Politically and geographically, Africa is a very confusing place because there are a number of different nations, there are a number of different civil wars and religious wars that are going on right at the moment, so it makes it really difficult, A, to get reliable statistical information when so many other chaotic things are going on, B, to get people the help that they need in terms of medication, information, and stuff like condoms, barriers, birth control in general, yeah. So it still is a very frightening situation in many developing nations like that. You were going to say something about
The medications and treatments that we have available here are not available at all in many of those countries. So as a result of that, as Larry was saying, the people are developing AIDS and they're dying at a much faster rate.
And the whole cultural situation and the remoteness of some of the areas. I mean, there are, I don't want to go on and on about this, but I understand that there's villages where the main thing that people die of. I mean, they're very small villages, but they're so remote, and it just tends, because they're, they all know each other, all the marriages and the sexual activity is between each other. That, I mean, so that's one extreme. So and it is heart-wrenching. But then we come back here and then we say, hey, we don't have any problems. We don't have to worry about, well, I have a 14-year-old son, and I will tell you, I am worried. It only takes once. It only takes, you know, when I was growing up, the thing we worried about that it only took once was what? Pregnancy. Now we have a whole other world to worry about. But I'm sure a lot of parents think that they're more concerned about this, that, and the other about their kids than the possibility of AIDS. Should they be concerned?
Very. Because living with HIV and AIDS just doesn't affect that person. It affects that person's relationship with the partner that may be in their life, their parents, their siblings. You know, a lot of not knowing things pop up. So it just doesn't affect that one person. You know, sometimes you hear a lot of people say, oh, I can't tell my mother or I can't tell my father because they may decide to disown them. Or, so there's a lot of scared things that go along with being positive. Of where when you have families that understand the virus and understand, you know, how they can and cannot be infected with the virus, they tend to more accept one of their family members if they were infected with the virus.
So we have a concern about how to keep our children and our friends and loved ones and ourselves from becoming HIV positive. And then we have to worry about the people who may become, that they may not be open with us, may even be angry, could even be moving the virus through the community because no one is sitting down and dealing and handling. That must be a hellacious situation to find out that you're HIV positive.
Certainly.
Yes. Yes, it is. 11 years ago, I found out I had HIV. And 11 years ago, there was not a lot of information out there for me to get my hands on, to learn about this disease, to figure out how to tell my friends, my family. It was a very frustrating thing. Now, there is a lot more information available to people who test positive for HIV. A lot more options for treatments, both accepted treatments and experimental treatments, as well as alternative therapies.
Now, the Nebraska AIDS Project works a lot with men and women who have been infected with HIV and do or do not yet have full-blown AIDS, but and that's a major thrust of what they do. It takes up a lot of resources, it takes up a lot of time and a lot of energy. Do you still find, you yourself personally and you as educators still find a lot of prejudice about HIV and AIDS? I remember when it first came out and I was doing stories, people say, I would never even get near it. I mean, you know, we got over some of that irrationality. Is it any better? Where do we need some work?
I think you hit the nail on the head. We got over some of that irrationality. There's still a lot of fear out there. There's still a lot of work to be done, especially in rural areas like Nebraska, Iowa, because it's much more difficult to get information to rural areas.
To get information in terms of how those with HIV and AIDS should be treated. I don't mean how I treat you. Do I treat you well? But I mean medically and maybe relationship-wise. Or are there many people in the rural areas with AIDS, or do they generally come to the cities where the, you know, the cocktails and the companionship in terms of I understand your problem are more readily available?
Speaking for Nebraska, most of the people with HIV and AIDS are living on the eastern side of the state, and simply because we have our larger cities, Lincoln and Omaha here. But there are people out in rural Nebraska who are living with HIV and AIDS, and in many cases feel that they need to come to either Lincoln or Omaha to get treatment, to get services.
And get understanding?
Right, and get understanding, because in a rural community, they're afraid that if the community finds out they have HIV or AIDS, that the community will turn on them.
What about, there's a disconnect. Maybe we are getting better. Maybe we're not as irrational in terms of how we treat people with HIV and AIDS, and even how we talk about it. But there is a disconnect still between how I'm not talking about you personally, it's a terrible thing. I might want to know you, I might even want to be friends with you, but it's a horrible thing. It's the worst thing in the world that I could think of. You know, there's AIDS, and then there's cancer, and then our behavior of our, you know, out there. I'm sure every teenager in the world would say AIDS is terrible.
Yeah, it's terrible, and it's highly unlikely that I will ever
Right.
get HIV infection.
Which is typical of teenagers and everything else in the world.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I bet that they just think it's infinitesimal chance if they'll
Yeah.
get it.
I think what Ron said earlier is very true. I think the absolutely, completely incorrect information that people may have once had, for the most part, has been filled in with better and more correct information. It's very rare, fairly rare, to find people with absolutely irrational, unfounded fears of touching or being in the presence
I
of
can't even
someone.
breathe your air. You
Yeah,
know.
they still exist, but they're not, they're fairly rare. But what I think is still very much there are more subtle fears and more subtle distrust of other people operating. Because in the back of some people's minds, even people who want to bring a speaker to their school and talk to their class or something like that, there's still a piece of it, what kind of person is going to come and talk to my class? Maybe if they have HIV or AIDS, they're a bad person. That's a very, very prevalent line of thinking, that people have gotten into the situation because they deserve to, or because they willfully acted in such a way as to become infected, or because they're just a bad person. And that's fortunately one of the first things that dissolves when they actually do encounter people living with HIV and people from the Nebraska AIDS Project who are volunteers. That firsthand encounter with someone helps them really realize that people are people, and they're not vastly different from anybody else, or from anybody that you work with or go to school with or shop with or live next door to.
And this is probably then, in terms of other than helping those who have HIV and AIDS, is probably one of the most valuable things that the Nebraska AIDS Project or any organization can do, is to show that this is something that people get. I mean, not bad people or devils in you know, suits and ties or whatever. This is what people get, just like they get cancer, just like they get, you know, but there's still, I know people, educated people that are well known in this town that still have that attitude.
Sure.
That they're, you know, they're sinful people, they're bad people, and it's pretty insidious. People may not say it
But they feel it.
as readily as they used to. It's like prejudice, racial prejudice.
Yeah.
We've learned to sort of, okay, I've got to bring it down the volume because I can't say this too loud, but I do believe it.
And very often you can feel that from people.
Do the kids relate? Do you go? You go. I'm sure
I go
you
out
have-
and speak.
and you have a million duties to do with the Nebraska AIDS Project, but you still fit some of that in. And I've
Yes.
been to classrooms where persons with AIDS have spoken, and the kids really do open up, and adults do. I've been to a Rotary Club, and I was curious, how those business people would relate. But again, I said, going back to, there is often a disconnect into once you personalize something and not make it a demon, i.e. the person with AIDS or HIV, then in a sense, I mean, that's really good. But then you lose some of the fear.
Some of the fear. Well, yeah.
I'm not saying let's go back. Please don't understand.
No, but fear, for some reason, many people believe that fear is really the best prevention. Boy, they want us to
Pregnancy
come and
for me was a
scare
when I was
our
young, was
kids
a fear,
into
but
not getting HIV. And that's typically not an effective behavior change tool. Everything that we've looked at, that social scientists are looking at with what encourages people to change and maintain safer behaviors, it is not a fear factor. It is self-esteem. It is rewards for positive behavior from your social group. It is having people around you who care about you. Those are the things that help people change their behavior. Fear, anger, and hatred do not.
okay, so let's get positive about it. Let's feel good about ourselves. Let's get out there and go to the schools. Let's go out to the citizens of Omaha, Nebraska, wherever. And then we'll say, now we're going to educate you. We want you to feel good about your decisions because you're making the right ones. Do you still go home at night when you're done educating and living this life that you never stop living because you live it, that we're not getting the message? That Omaha, Nebraska, Douglas County.
Well, I think we are getting the message. If we weren't, we would be dealing with much larger numbers of people than we're dealing with. And we should be very glad that we're not dealing with the really, what I would call large-scale proportions of HIV infections and AIDS that exist in places like New York or California or large urban centers in this country, and in the rural areas also, but concentrated in urban areas.
I like to go home and think that we still have a lot more to do. There's always a lot more to do. In AIDS education, in educating people not only about the disease, but about the people who are living with the disease and not fearing them. Interestingly enough, I still find that more adults fear me than young people. Teens, they don't have a fear of me that adults have. And
Well, I think it probably goes back to children being a little more in tune with just, they haven't taken on all the trappings of prejudice and those kinds of things.
I don't think they have those learned behaviors yet.
Paulette, when you, and I'm not asking you this because you are black, but I serve on the Red Cross board, and we have an AIDS education component, and we are gearing into the black, the Hispanic, and the other. Even though AIDS can happen anywhere, there are considered some high-risk groups.
Right.
What is NAP doing to reach these groups, even though everyone needs to be reached?
Yeah, that's true. Well, I do North Omaha outreach, and there I'm targeting the African American community. It's really hard to get into a lot of the communities unless you're like. You can go there, but a lot of times if you're not like the other person, they're like, how are you going to tell me?
Yes.
Yes, so, but as far as the outreach itself, I think it goes pretty good. I find a lot of people do have questions, a lot of disputes they've had about who's right and who's wrong about a lot of things people have said about HIV and AIDS. People want the condoms. The hotline at work has really gotten a lot of calls from Black Americans now that I've noticed since I've started the North Omaha Reach. It's almost doubled. And just from the information I get when I'm out, but I don't have to be on outreach, just my everyday out. I kind of never leave my outreach position. People see me, there's a lady with a red bag, because, a lot of times I have condoms or something in it. And, they ask for the information, but I always let them know, you know, it's okay to go talk about it. You know, talk about this. Find out what you need to know. Share it with a friend. Maybe they're doing something and they're not really sure if that's putting them at risk. And I encourage them, talk to your sister, talk to your brother, cousin, aunt. You know, if you feel that you have a family member that's of age or that's sexually active, talk to them about, let them know the risk involved when they decide to make that decision to have sexual intercourse. I have a 5-year-old daughter. At this time in her life, the most important thing for me to let her know now is that blood is poison. At this time in her life, that's her only risk to be concerned about. She has to know. You know, if one of her friends are bleeding, nosebleeds are very common, which we had a case like that. A little boy was playing on the swing set with her, and he bumped his nose and it started bleeding. She ran in the house, mommy, so-and-so's bleeding. And we went outside, and you know, it felt good for me to see she didn't touch it. She ran and got an adult as soon as she could.
And as sad as it is that we have to, and you know, you have AIDS and you sit here and you go, don't you hate to hear that blood is poison? But you know,
No,
I mean, because blood is life-giving. I guess there's sort of an irony there, is all I'm saying. But we have come a long way, and yet we still, and the little kids now are learning, but we fought a lot of battles. I mean, there were battles when public safety people wanted to have access to testing if they came in contact with them. I mean, are we getting over some of these lumps in the road about issues of people with AIDS and HIV and those that are the protectors or the school teachers? I mean, remember that the stories of the little kids wanting to go to school. I mean, all those, Alan, I can't remember the little boy's name. Ryan White. I mean, we're getting past protesting and screaming and burning and all these things too. Now seeing the little kids turn up. I mean, are these positive things to you?
I feel they are. It shows us that the education is working. It shows us that people are hearing what we're saying and realize that there's not just the danger of HIV infection that we're talking about here. There are all kinds of other bloodborne diseases.
That's absolutely correct.
And it's something that everybody needs to be aware of. And, you know, as Paulette said, children need to be aware of that. Children are infected with this disease too. You know, this is a disease that everybody has.
Well, once a disease comes into our world, we have to, you've seen it with other diseases, the plague even. It is, you can hate, you can blame, you can have anger, but the best thing is to learn to just fight it with very practical things.
Knowledge.
And so you see your 5-year-old do it. But where are the battles yet to be fought in terms of the myth? I mean, do people still believe that homosexual males are the prime victims of AIDS instead of persons with AIDS?
Sure they do.
It's still a big blame. Yeah.
I guess I'll go back to statistics for a second and make a comment. Statistics give us some way of looking at the situation. It gives us some information to work with that tells us a little bit about populations being affected in terms of age and gender and racial and ethnic group. But they don't tell us the whole picture. There are a lot of things that don't make it into the statistics.
Plus, that's always where we've been.
Yeah, and it's always where we've been. The good thing is we have HIV statistics, which are much more current than AIDS statistics, which are really a historical running total. We know that the infection is hitting certain populations harder than what we could call their fair share. In particular, African Americans and Latinos, in terms of the percentage of the population that they make up, are coming in with far more than their fair share of HIV infections and AIDS diagnoses. Women are rapidly increasing, and particularly young women. And of course, we continue to see gay men testing positive. But when it comes to reaching all of these populations, part of the key is to have a staff and a body of volunteers who are capable of reaching different segments of our population. Paulette and her work is absolutely very important to reaching North Omahans and African Americans. We've taken care to have Spanish speakers on our staff, and we're trying, even as a staff, to learn more about the cultural issues at work there in that community. Paulette teaches us a lot about African American community norms and standards and practices, and what we can learn from one another is some of the best medicine for us as prevention workers, when we can understand more than the little piece of the world that we personally happen to live in. And
Nebraska AIDS Project has been really the prime mover in the state of Nebraska in terms of all these components: understanding, answering questions, going out, outreach where we go. We don't wait for you to call, we go out there. The hotlines, working with teenagers. You have a very healthy, in terms of growing numbers of young teenagers who are getting involved in spreading the word. And they perhaps in that demographic, you say you've got to be like the group. You have to be one of them to be heard the best. Tell me about your teenagers.
Our teen group is a wonderful group of young people that all share an interest in keeping themselves HIV negative as well as keeping their peers HIV negative. They become very well educated, and they act as a resource to their fellow students in their schools and to other teens throughout the community.
The ones I've met are very strong, very outspoken, pretty cool, not nerdy. Mm-hmm. You know how when you were a kid there was nerdy groups, and I would think that they would be the most effective, even if they were with a group of older people, of saying, don't do that. And they speak very confidently. We need for all our people to speak very confidently about the facts. As a group, I have been most impressed with you. Is it TECA?
Yes.
Teens
Educated to Combat AIDS.
All right. If you had one wish for something to happen tomorrow other than to find the cure, I mean, we'd all hope for that. What would it be in terms of preventing future cases and in helping those who are already infected? What would your wish be?
My wish would be to see parents and their children have much more sophisticated and much more open lines of communication that don't just start when the kid turns 17 or 18 and starts, looking like they're almost an adult.
Okay, we're going to hop here because we're running out of time. What would your wish be?
I think I would probably wish that people would talk more. Just talk and accept people living with HIV and AIDS just like they were the next door neighbor or the person across the street, the neighbors.
Okay. And Ron?
My wish would be that the community as a whole would be able to recognize that HIV is not an individual's problem. HIV is a community's problem.
I want to thank you very much. Ron Carlett, Paulette Bailey, and Larry Beers from the Nebraska AIDS Project. Remember that name. If you have questions or know someone who has questions, needs testing or whatever, Nebraska AIDS Project. Thank you for joining us today on Consider This.
Thank you.
Consider This with Carol Schrader is supported in part by Allegiant Health and Bassin Associates.